They called her the wallflower, the forgotten daughter, the woman no bride-hunting mama bothered to acknowledge. For 5 brutal London seasons, Eliza Whitmore had been invisible, a ghost in silk, watching the glittering elite from the shadows while her family's ruin stripped away every advantage she'd ever had. She had learned to survive by disappearing. Until the night the most dangerous man in England walked straight through the crowd, locked eyes with her, and said 2 words that shattered everything. "Dance with me." The Duke of Blackthorn never made mistakes. And when Alexander Blackthorn chose the woman no one else wanted, the entire ballroom knew something catastrophic was about to happen. If you want to see how the Invisible Woman became the most feared Duchess in England, stay until the end. Drop a like, comment what city you're watching from, and let's begin. The Ashford Ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their golden light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the silk gowns of London's most privileged daughters. Laughter rippled through the room like champagne bubbles, light, careless, expensive. It was the height of the season, and every unmarried woman with a dowry worth mentioning had arrived with the same unspoken goal: attract the right kind of attention, secure the right kind of future, and avoid at all costs becoming what Eliza Whitmore had become. Forgotten. Eliza stood near the edge of the room, her back to a marble column, her gloved hands folded neatly at her waist. Her gown was pale blue, respectable but unremarkable, the kind of dress that whispered, "I'm here," without ever demanding to be seen. It fit her role perfectly. She wasn't here to compete. She was here because her aunt had insisted, because appearances still mattered even when everything else had crumbled, and because refusing would have raised questions the Whitmore family couldn't afford to answer. 5 years ago, she'd walked into rooms like this as someone. The daughter of a successful merchant with ties to minor nobility, a respectable dowry, decent prospects. Not a prize, perhaps, but not a burden either. Then her father made a single catastrophic investment, a shipping venture that collapsed overnight, dragging half his fortune and his reputation into the depths with it. The creditors came. The friends vanished. And Eliza learned the first brutal lesson of London society. You are only as valuable as your current worth. No dowry meant no future. No future meant no attention. And no attention meant she might as well not exist. Still lurking in corners, I see. Eliza didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Lady Constance Harrow swept past her with a smirk, her emerald gown shimmering like poison, her entourage of equally polished women trailing behind. They didn't stop. They never did. Eliza was part of the scenery now, just another disappointing fixture no one bothered to engage. "Constance, don't be cruel," one of the women murmured, though her tone carried more amusement than reproach. "Cruel? I'm being practical." Constance flicked open her fan with a sharp snap. 5 seasons and not a single proposal. At some point, even charity has limits. They laughed. A soft tinkling sound that cut deeper than any shout. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't move, didn't respond. She'd learned that too. Silence was armor. The moment you reacted, you gave them power. The moment you showed pain, they'd sharpen the blade. So she stood still and let them pass. Across the room, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Couples began to pair off, gliding onto the polished floor with practiced elegance. Eliza watched them the way she always did, not with envy, but with cold, analytical clarity. She'd spent 5 years studying this world from the outside, watching how power moved, how reputations were built and destroyed, how the right word at the right moment could elevate someone or ruin them entirely. It was a game, a vicious, glittering game, and she'd been forced to learn the rules without ever being allowed to play. Lady Helena Morgan danced past in the arms of Lord Ashford, her expression serene, her posture flawless. Perfect. But Eliza had watched her earlier, whispering furiously to her mother near the refreshment table. An argument about debts, perhaps. Or a suitor who wasn't quite suitable. The cracks were always there if you knew how to look. Beside the windows, Lord Pemberton laughed too loudly at his own joke, his cheeks flushed with wine. His estate was profitable, but his eldest son had a gambling problem everyone pretended not to notice. Near the far wall, the Dowager Countess of Ravenhill sat like a spider in silk, her sharp eyes tracking every movement, every misstep. She controlled half the marriage market through sheer force of judgment, and one disapproving glance from her could end a season before it began. Eliza saw it all. The lies, the desperation, the fragile alliances held together by money and reputation and fear. And she knew, with bitter certainty, that she would never be part of it. Not anymore. Eliza. She turned. Her aunt, Mrs. Georgiana Whitmore, approached with the tight-lipped expression she'd worn for the past 3 years, ever since she'd reluctantly taken in her ruined brother's daughter. Georgiana was respectable, connected enough to maintain invitations, but not wealthy enough to be generous. Hosting Eliza was an act of duty, not kindness. "You're standing alone again." Georgiana's voice was low, clipped. "It reflects poorly." "Would you prefer I dance with the marble columns?" Eliza asked quietly. Her aunt's eyes narrowed. "I would prefer you make an effort. Smile, engage, show some charm for heaven's sake. You're not entirely without assets." Eliza almost laughed. Assets? What assets? Her family name was tainted. Her dowry was non-existent. Her connections had evaporated the moment her father's business collapsed. "I'll do my best," she said instead, because arguing was pointless. Georgiana gave her one last disapproving look before sweeping away, her attention already shifting to more promising prospects. Eliza exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening against the column. She wanted to leave, to walk out of this suffocating room and never come back. But leaving wasn't an option, not when survival depended on maintaining the thinnest thread of respectability. So she stayed, and watched, and waited for the night to end. The ballroom doors opened. At first, no one noticed. The music continued. The dancers whirled. The gossip flowed. But then the whispers started. A ripple of awareness moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass, heads turning, conversations faltering. Eliza felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, a sudden tension that made her pulse quicken. "Is that? It can't be. He never attends these things." Eliza followed the crowd's collective gaze toward the entrance. And there he was, Alexander Blackthorne, the Duke of Blackthorne. He stood in the doorway like a storm-given human form, tall, dark-haired, and utterly devoid of the polished charm that defined men of his rank. His black coat was impeccably tailored, his cravat stark white against his throat. But there was nothing soft about him. His face was all sharp angles and cold control, his gray eyes scanning the room with the detached precision of a predator assessing prey. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply walked forward, and the crowd parted. Eliza had never seen him in person before. No one in her diminished social circle moved in the same spheres as the Duke of Blackthorne, but she'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Ruthless. Unforgiving. A man who'd inherited his title at 19 after his father's sudden death and had spent the next decade consolidating power with brutal efficiency. He didn't attend social events, didn't court favor, didn't play the games that defined London society. And yet, here he was. "Why is he here?" someone whispered. "He's looking for someone," another voice answered, hushed and uncertain. Eliza's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't know why. She had no reason to be nervous. Men like the Duke of Blackthorne didn't notice women like her. But then his gaze swept across the room and stopped. On her. Eliza froze. It wasn't possible. She was standing in the shadows, half hidden by the column, completely unremarkable in every conceivable way. He couldn't be looking at her, but he was. His expression didn't change. No flicker of recognition, no softening, just that cold, assessing stare. And then he moved, straight toward her. The whispers exploded. "Is he? Who is she? I don't even recognize her." Eliza's breath caught. Her mind raced. This had to be a mistake. He was walking toward someone behind her. Someone important, someone worth noticing. But there was no one behind her, just the marble column, and the wall, and her. The Duke stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered, utterly still, radiating a cold authority that made the air around him feel heavier. His gray eyes locked onto hers with the kind of focus that made her feel simultaneously visible and dissected. Miss Whitmore. Her name. He knew her name. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And the entire ballroom was watching. Eliza's mind spun. She didn't understand. This man, this feared, powerful, untouchable man, was asking her to dance, not Lady Constance with her perfect pedigree, not Lady Helena with her flawless reputation. Her, the forgotten woman, The wallflower, the failure. She should say no, should refuse, should protect herself from whatever cruel joke this had to be. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was no mockery there, no pity, just cold, unwavering intent. He wasn't playing a game, he was executing a plan. And for reasons she couldn't begin to comprehend, she was part of it. Slowly she placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm, certain. And as he led her onto the dance floor, the whispers became a roar. The Duke of Blackthorn danced with the precision of a man who did everything with absolute control. His hand rested lightly at Eliza's waist, his other hand holding hers with just enough pressure to guide her through the steps. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't offer any explanation for why he'd chosen her. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Around them, every eye in the ballroom was locked on them. She could feel the weight of 100 stares, 100 unspoken questions. "Why are you doing this?" she finally whispered. His gaze didn't waver. "Because I need you." The words hit her like a slap. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "You know nothing." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not amusement, respect. "I know you've survived 5 years of being invisible in a world that eats weakness alive," he said quietly. "I know you've learned to watch, to listen, to see things others miss. And I know you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's standing in front of you." Eliza's breath caught. "What do you want from me?" The music swelled. The Duke guided her through a turn, his movements as controlled as his voice. "I need a wife." She almost stumbled. "I need someone intelligent, observant, someone who understands how this world works but isn't beholden to its rules." His gray eyes bored into hers. "Someone no one will see coming." Eliza stared at him, her mind reeling. "This is insane. This is necessity. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone." His voice dropped, low and unyielding. "I want you." The music ended. The ballroom erupted into polite applause, but Eliza barely heard it, because the Duke of Blackthorn was still holding her hand, and he wasn't letting go. "Meet me tomorrow," he said. 3 o'clock, Blackthorn House. I'll explain everything." Then he released her, stepped back, and walked out of the ballroom without another word, leaving Eliza standing alone in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by 100 stunned, whispering faces, and the certain knowledge that her invisible life had just ended. Ocheb. The carriage ride home was unbearable. Aunt Georgiana sat across from Eliza in rigid silence, her face carved from ice, her gloved hands gripping her reticule so tightly the leather creaked. The only sound was the clatter of wheels on cobblestone and the occasional snap of the driver's whip. Eliza knew better than to speak first. Finally, as they turned onto their street, Georgiana's control shattered. "What?" she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Was that?" Eliza met her aunt's eyes. "A dance." "Don't be flippant with me, girl." Georgiana leaned forward, her expression venomous. "The Duke of Blackthorn doesn't attend social events. He certainly doesn't dance with ruined nobodies. So I will ask you again. What was that?" "I don't know." "You don't know." Georgiana's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You expect me to believe that the most powerful, most feared man in England singled you out for no reason whatsoever?" "I'm telling you the truth. I've never met him before tonight." "Then he's using you." Georgiana sat back, her eyes narrowing. "He must be. Some scheme, some plot. Men like him don't notice women like you unless there's something to gain." The words stung, but Eliza kept her face blank. She'd heard variations of this assessment for years. "He asked me to meet him tomorrow," Eliza said quietly. Georgiana went very still. "At Blackthorn House, 3 o'clock. For a long moment her aunt said nothing. Then slowly her expression shifted from anger to something far more dangerous: calculation. "You'll go?" Georgiana said. Eliza blinked. "What?" "You'll go. You'll listen to whatever he has to say, and then you'll tell me everything." "Aunt Georgiana, do you think I'm a fool?" Georgiana's voice turned sharp. "Whatever the Duke wants, it's important enough for him to make a public spectacle. That means leverage. That means opportunity. She leaned forward again, her eyes glittering. This family has been drowning for 3 years. If there's even a chance this man can pull us back to the surface, you will take it. Eliza's stomach turned. You want me to use him? I want you to stop being useless. Georgiana's words landed like blows. You've been nothing but a burden since your father ruined us. If the Duke of Blackthorn is handing you a lifeline, you will grab it with both hands and you will not let go. Do I make myself clear? Eliza looked at her aunt, at the desperation beneath the cruelty, at the fear that had been eating away at her for years. And she understood. Georgiana wasn't angry because Eliza had been noticed. She was terrified of losing control. Perfectly clear, Eliza said softly. Georgiana sat back, satisfied. Good. Wear the gray dress. It's the most respectable thing you own. The carriage stopped. They'd arrived. Eliza stepped out into the cold night air, her mind racing. Tomorrow, she would walk into the house of the most dangerous man in England, and nothing would ever be the same. Sleep didn't come. Eliza lay in her small, drafty room, the smallest bedroom in her aunt's townhouse, the one reserved for unwanted relatives, and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. I need a wife. The Duke's words echoed in her mind, cold and precise. Not I want, not I'm looking for. I need, like she was a tool, a piece on a chessboard. But why her? Eliza turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, 5 years perfecting the art of going unnoticed. And now, suddenly, the most powerful man in England had seen her, had chosen her. It didn't make sense. Unless... Eliza sat up slowly, her mind sharpening. Someone who understands how this world works but isn't beholden to its rules. Someone no one will see coming. He didn't want a society bride. He didn't want someone with powerful connections or a flawless reputation. He wanted someone expendable, someone who could be molded, controlled, used, someone with nothing to lose. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it crystallized into something else entirely. Clarity. Because if the Duke thought she was going to be a passive piece in whatever game he was playing, he was wrong. Eliza had spent 5 years learning to survive in a world that wanted her to disappear. She'd learned patience, strategy, how to read people, how to see the cracks in their armor. If Alexander Blackthorn wanted to use her, fine, but she would make damn sure she used him right back. Blackthorn House loomed at the edge of Mayfair like a fortress pretending to be a residence. Dark stone walls, sharp angles, windows that reflected light without revealing anything inside. No decorative flourishes, no welcoming warmth, just cold, imposing authority. Eliza stood at the iron gates at precisely 3 o'clock, her gray dress buttoned to her throat, her hair pulled back in a severe knot. She'd walked here rather than take a carriage, partly to save money, partly to clear her head. Now, staring up at the house, she felt her resolve waver. This was madness. She should turn around, go home, forget this ever happened. But then the gate swung open. A tall, thin man in impeccable butler's livery stood in the doorway, his expression as welcoming as the stone walls. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice flat. "His Grace is expecting you." No turning back now. Eliza walked through the gates. The interior of Blackthorn House was exactly what she'd expected. Grand, cold, and utterly devoid of personality. Marble floors, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring down from the walls. Everything was expensive and perfectly maintained, but there was no warmth, no life. It felt like a mausoleum. The butler led her through a series of hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence, until they reached a set of heavy double doors. "His Grace will see you in the study," the butler said, opening the doors. Eliza stepped inside. The study was smaller than she'd expected, lined floor to ceiling with books, a massive desk dominating the center of the room. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating papers spread across the desk's surface, maps, ledgers, documents covered in dense script. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the light, was the Duke. He turned as she entered. "Miss Whitmore?" No greeting, no pleasantries, just her name, spoken with the same cold precision as the night before. "Your Grace." Eliza curtsied, keeping her voice steady. The Duke gestured to a chair in front of the desk. Sit. She sat. He didn't. Instead, he moved to the desk, his hands resting on its surface as he studied her with those unnerving gray eyes. I'm going to be direct, he said. I don't have time for games, and I suspect neither do you. Eliza said nothing. Waited. I need to secure custody of my niece, the Duke continued. Her parents, my younger brother and his wife, died in a carriage accident 6 months ago. She's 8 years old, orphaned, and currently the subject of a legal battle that will determine who controls her future. Eliza's breath caught. A child. The court hearing is in 3 weeks, the Duke said. My brother's wife's family, the Harringtons, are fighting me for custody. They're arguing that I'm unfit, that my reputation, my lifestyle, my refusal to marry makes me an unsuitable guardian. And they're using that against you, Eliza said quietly. They're using everything against me. The Duke's voice hardened. They've painted me as a ruthless, cold-hearted tyrant who cares more about power than family, and they're not entirely wrong. The admission was startling in its honesty. But they're also liars, he continued. They don't want my niece because they care about her welfare. They want her because she's my heir. If something happens to me, she inherits everything, and they want to control that inheritance. Eliza's mind raced. So you need a wife to prove you're… what? Domesticated? I need a wife to prove I can provide a stable, appropriate home. The Duke's eyes locked onto hers. I need someone the court will see as respectable, someone who can play the role convincingly. And you think I can do that? I know you can. Eliza stood, her heart pounding. Why me? There are 100 women who would marry you in a heartbeat. Women with money, connections, perfect reputations. I don't want perfect, the Duke interrupted. Perfect comes with expectations, demands, families who will try to leverage the marriage for their own gain. He moved around the desk, stopping just a few feet from her. You have none of that. No family connections worth exploiting, no social capital to spend, nothing to lose and everything to gain. The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in years. And what do I gain? Eliza asked. A title, wealth, security. The Duke's voice was utterly matter-of-fact. A future that doesn't involve being a burden to your aunt for the rest of your life. Eliza flinched. I've had you investigated, the Duke said, and there was no apology in his tone. I know your situation. I know you're one bad season away from complete ruin. I know your aunt resents you and your prospects are non-existent. He paused. I'm offering you a way out. In exchange for what? In exchange for helping me win custody of my niece. Play the role of devoted wife. Convince the court we're a stable, appropriate family. And once the custody is secured, he shrugged. We can come to an arrangement. An arrangement. You'll have your own household, your own income, freedom to live as you choose. His eyes held hers. I'm not interested in a real marriage, Miss Whitmore. I'm interested in a strategic alliance. Eliza's mind spun. It was cold, calculated, transactional, and it was the best offer she'd had in 5 years. How do I know you'll keep your word? She asked. You don't. The Duke's expression didn't change. But consider this. I gain nothing by betraying you. If this marriage falls apart, the court will give my niece to the Harringtons, and I'll lose everything I'm fighting for. Your success is my success. Eliza studied him, looking for deception, for hidden traps, but all she saw was cold, brutal honesty, a man who needed something and was willing to pay for it. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. The Duke moved back to his desk. After that, I'll find someone else. Eliza's jaw tightened. That's not much time. It's all the time I have. He looked up, and for the first time she saw something beneath the cold control. Not warmth exactly, but something rawer. My niece deserves better than being used as a pawn by people who don't care about her. If you can help me prevent that, I'll make sure you never have to worry about being invisible again. The words hung in the air. Eliza turned and walked toward the door. Miss Whitmore? She stopped, looking back. Whatever you decide, the Duke said quietly. Thank you for coming. It was the closest thing to kindness she'd heard from him, and it was enough to make her pause. I'll send word tomorrow, she said. Then she left. Aunt. The walk home took an hour. Eliza barely noticed. Her mind was a storm of calculations, fears, possibilities. This was insane. Marrying a man she didn't know, entering a world she'd been exiled from, risking everything on a calculated gamble. But what was the alternative? Another 5 years of being invisible, of watching her aunt's resentment grow, of knowing she had no future, no prospects, no way out, unless she made one. Eliza stopped in the middle of the street, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. The Duke was right about one thing. She had nothing to lose. And maybe, just maybe, that made her the most dangerous piece on the board, because a woman with nothing to lose had nothing to fear. She thought of the Duke's niece, an 8-year-old girl caught in a war between adults who saw her as a possession, not a person. She thought of the cold calculation in the Duke's eyes, but also the flicker of something else. Desperation, maybe, or determination. And she thought of herself. 5 years of silence, 5 years of being nothing. What if she could be something again? Not through luck, not through charity, through choice, through power. Eliza started walking again, her steps steady and sure. She knew what her answer would be. By the time she reached her aunt's townhouse, night had fallen. The windows glowed with warm light, but the house still felt cold. Georgiana was waiting in the drawing room, her posture rigid with anticipation. "Well," she demanded the moment Eliza entered. Eliza met her aunt's eyes. "I'm going to marry the Duke of Blackthorn," she said. Georgiana's expression went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, disbelief, triumph, greed. "When?" she breathed. "As soon as possible. He needs this resolved quickly." "What does he want from you?" Eliza smiled. It was a cold, calculated expression that would have looked right at home on the Duke's face. "Everything," she said. "And in return, I'll take everything I can get." Georgiana studied her niece, and for the first time in 3 years, something like respect flickered in her eyes. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "you're not as useless as I thought." Eliza said nothing. She simply turned and walked upstairs to her small, cold room. Tomorrow, she would send word to the Duke. Tomorrow, her old life would end, and the woman no one had chosen would become the one person everyone would have to see. The Duchess of Blackthorn. Dunce. The letter arrived at Blackthorn House at dawn. It contained 3 words: "I accept." E.W. Alexander Blackthorn read it twice, his expression unchanged. Then he rang for his secretary. "Prepare the marriage contracts," he said. "We'll need a special license. The ceremony will be private. 1 week from today." The secretary's eyes widened. "Your Grace, a week? That's highly irregular." "I don't care." The Duke's voice was flat. "Make it happen." When the secretary left, Alexander walked to the window, staring out at the gray London morning. He'd gambled on the invisible woman. Now he would see if his instincts were right. Because if Eliza Whitmore was as intelligent, as observant, as capable as he believed, then together they might actually win. And if she wasn't, well, he'd already lost everything that mattered once. He could survive it again. But as he stood there, alone in the cold morning light, Alexander found himself hoping he was right about her. Because something in those quiet, watchful eyes had told him the truth. Eliza Whitmore wasn't just invisible. She was waiting for someone to see her, for a chance to fight back, for an opportunity to become something more. And Alexander Blackthorn had just given her exactly that. Now they would both find out what she was truly capable of. The game had begun, and neither of them had any intention of losing. The marriage contract arrived in a leather portfolio so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Eliza sat in her aunt's cramped drawing room, the document spread across her lap, and tried to make sense of the dense legal language that essentially boiled down to one thing: she was about to become property. Not in so many words, of course. The contract was carefully worded, full of provisions and clauses that made it sound like a partnership. But Eliza had learned to read between the lines. She would receive an annual income, a household staff, access to the Blackthorn estates, and in return she would fulfill the duties of a duchess, attend social functions, manage the household, present the image of a stable, respectable marriage. For 3 years. That was the key clause, buried on page 17. After 3 years, if the custody arrangement remained secure, they could quietly separate. She would keep her title, her income, and her independence. He would keep his niece. It was a business arrangement with an expiration date. Eliza should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt something closer to dread. Well? Georgiana hovered at her shoulder like a vulture circling carrion. What does it say? It says I'll be a duchess, Eliza replied quietly. And? And I'll have everything we've lost. Money, security, a future. Georgiana's expression twisted into something between triumph and bitterness. Then sign it, quickly, before he changes his mind. Eliza looked up at her aunt. You're not even going to ask what he wants from me? I don't care what he wants. Georgiana's voice turned sharp. This is the only chance this family has of clawing its way back from ruin. You will sign that contract, you will marry that man, and you will not fail. The words landed like stones. Eliza picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. One stroke of ink and everything would change. She thought of the Duke's cold gray eyes. The way he'd looked at her like she was a tool, a means to an end. The brutal honesty of his proposition. She thought of his niece. 8 years old, orphaned, caught in a war she didn't understand, and she thought of herself, 5 years of being invisible. 5 years of waiting for something, anything, to change. This was her chance, even if it terrified her. Eliza signed her name. The ink dried quickly, sealing her fate. The wedding took place 6 days later in a small chapel on the grounds of Blackthorn House. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. Just the Duke, Eliza, a stone-faced vicar, and 2 servants called in to witness. It was the coldest ceremony Eliza had ever attended. She wore a simple cream dress, not white, because this wasn't that kind of marriage. The Duke wore black, as always, his expression carved from granite. They stood side by side in the empty chapel, the morning light filtering through stained glass windows, and spoke vows that meant nothing and everything at once. Do you, Alexander Charles Blackthorn, take this woman? I do. No hesitation, no emotion, just cold certainty. The vicar turned to Eliza. Do you, Eliza Margaret Whitmore, take this man? Her throat tightened. She could still walk away, still refuse, still run back to her aunt's house and accept the slow death of invisibility. But then she thought of the Duke's words. You're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's standing in front of you. I do, she said. The vicar looked relieved. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may. The Duke didn't wait. He turned to Eliza, took her hand in his with the same brisk efficiency he'd shown throughout, and said, It's done. Not I love you, not I'll cherish you, just it's done. And somehow that brutal honesty was more reassuring than any pretty lie would have been. The vicar cleared his throat. Your Grace, traditionally the groom kisses. We're done here. The Duke released Eliza's hand and turned to the servants. Prepare the carriage. We leave for Thornfield Estate in 1 hour. Eliza blinked. Thornfield? My country estate, 3 hours north of London. The Duke's tone allowed no argument. That's where my niece is currently staying. That's where we'll live until the custody hearing. You didn't mention we'd be leaving London immediately. I'm mentioning it now. He walked toward the chapel doors, then paused, looking back at her. You're the Duchess of Blackthorn now, Eliza. That means you go where I go, do what needs to be done, and convince everyone watching that this marriage is real. Then he left, leaving Eliza standing alone in the empty chapel, wearing a ring that felt like a shackle, carrying a title that felt like a lie. The Duchess of Blackthorn. She'd wanted to be seen. Careful what you wish for. The carriage ride to Thornfield was 3 hours of suffocating silence. The Duke sat across from Eliza, reading through a stack of legal documents, his expression never changing. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence beyond the occasional shift of position when the carriage hit a rut in the road. Eliza stared out the window and tried to calm the panic rising in her chest. She'd married a stranger, was traveling to an unfamiliar estate to meet a traumatized child and pretend to be something she wasn't. And she had no idea what she was doing. Stop spiraling, the Duke said without looking up from his papers. Eliza's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? You're spiraling. I can hear you breathing faster. He finally looked at her, his gray eyes sharp. Whatever you're panicking about, stop. Panic is useless. I'm not panicking. You're terrified, which is understandable but unproductive. He set down his papers. So let me make this simple. When we arrive at Thornfield, you will meet my niece, Caroline. She's 8, she's grieving, and she doesn't trust easily. Your job is to be kind, patient. Don't try to replace her mother. Don't overwhelm her. Just be present. Eliza swallowed. And if she doesn't like me, then we're in trouble. The Duke's voice turned cold. Because the Harringtons will use that against us in court. They'll argue that I forced this marriage, that Caroline is miserable, that we're unfit guardians. So no pressure. Exactly. He picked up his papers again. Welcome to being a duchess. Eliza wanted to scream or cry, or both. Instead, she took a slow breath and forced herself to think. The Duke was right about one thing: panic was useless. If she was going to survive this, she needed to be strategic, observant, smart. She'd spent 5 years watching people, learning how they worked, how they lied, how they protected themselves. Now she just had to apply those skills to an 8-year-old girl. Tell me about Caroline, Eliza said. The Duke looked up, surprise flickering across his face. What? You said she doesn't trust easily. Why? What happened to her parents? What is she like? What scares her? Eliza leaned forward. If I'm supposed to win her over, I need to understand her. For the first time since the chapel, something shifted in the Duke's expression. Not quite approval, but close. Her parents died in a carriage accident 6 months ago, he said quietly. She was with them. She survived. They didn't. Eliza's breath caught. She saw it happen? She doesn't talk about it. Hasn't spoken more than a few words since the funeral. The Duke's jaw tightened. She's staying at Thornfield with her governess, Miss Petra. Safe, fed, cared for. But she's hollow. And the Harringtons? Her maternal grandparents. They visited once after the accident, tried to take her immediately, made her cry. His voice turned cold. I had them removed from the property. They've been fighting me in court ever since. Eliza studied him, really looked at him. She thought he was cold, ruthless, a man who only cared about power and control. But there was something else beneath the ice, something raw. Grief. You loved your brother, she said softly. The Duke's expression went blank. That's irrelevant. It's not. We're not discussing this. He looked back down at his papers, effectively ending the conversation. But Eliza had seen enough. The feared Duke of Blackthorn wasn't just fighting for custody because of inheritance or pride. He was fighting because he'd already lost his brother. And he refused to lose Caroline, too. Done. Thornfield Estate rose from the countryside like something out of a Gothic novel, all dark stone and sharp towers surrounded by windswept moors that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't beautiful. It was imposing, forbidding, the kind of place that looked like it had secrets buried in its foundations. Home sweet home, the Duke said dryly as the carriage rolled through the gates. Eliza stared up at the massive structure. It's depressing? Yes. He stepped out of the carriage and turned to help her down. My father believed comfort made people soft. He designed Thornfield to build character. And did it? The Duke's smile was sharp and humorless. It built monsters. Before Eliza could respond, the front doors opened and a woman emerged. She was in her 40s, dressed in severe gray, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp, assessing Eliza with the kind of scrutiny that made her feel like she was being inventoried. Your Grace, the woman curtsied to the Duke, then turned to Eliza. Your Grace. The title sounded forced. This is Mrs. Holloway, the Duke said. The housekeeper. She runs Thornfield with an iron fist. Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. I run it efficiently, Your Grace. Where's Miss Petra? In the nursery with Lady Caroline. They've been expecting you. The Duke nodded and started toward the house, then stopped, looking back at Eliza. Are you coming? She realized she was still standing by the carriage, frozen. Yes, she said quickly, hurrying after him. Inside, Thornfield was exactly what she'd expected: dark wood, heavy furniture, portraits of disapproving ancestors. But it was also eerily quiet. No sounds of servants bustling about. No life, just silence. The Duke led her up a grand staircase, down a long hallway, and stopped in front of a door. He hesitated, just for a moment, then knocked. "Come in," a female voice called. The room beyond was the first warm space Eliza had seen in the entire estate. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating shelves full of books and toys, a small table set for tea, and in the corner a rocking chair where a woman sat reading to a little girl. The girl looked up, and Eliza's heart broke. Caroline was tiny, fragile, with dark hair like her uncle's and eyes that were far too old for an 8-year-old face. She wore a simple blue dress, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully blank. She looked like a child who'd learned that showing emotion was dangerous. "Caroline," the Duke said gently, "this is Eliza, my wife." The girl's eyes widened, just slightly. Then she looked down at her hands. The woman in the rocking chair, Miss Petra presumably, stood and curtsied. She was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Your Grace," she said to the Duke, then to Eliza. "Your Grace, it's an honor." Eliza barely heard her. She was watching Caroline, the way the girl's shoulders were hunched, the way her hands gripped each other, the way she wouldn't look at anyone directly. This wasn't just grief. This was fear. Eliza knelt down, putting herself at Caroline's eye level. Not too close, not threatening. "Hello, Caroline," she said softly. "I know this is strange. I know you don't know me. And I know—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know you've lost a lot." Caroline's hands tightened. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Eliza continued. "I'm just here. If you want to talk, I'll listen. If you want to be quiet, that's okay too. If you want me to leave you alone, I will." Finally, Caroline looked up. Her eyes met Eliza's, and for just a moment something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "Do you like stories?" Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. Eliza's throat tightened. "I love stories. Miss Petra was reading to me about a princess who escaped from a tower." Caroline hesitated. "Do you know any stories like that?" "I know dozens," Eliza said. "Would you like to hear one?" Caroline nodded. And just like that, the first wall came down. That night, Eliza lay in a massive bed in a room that wasn't hers, wearing a nightgown she'd never seen before, and tried to process everything that had happened. She was married, she was a duchess, she was responsible for helping a traumatized child, and she had no idea what she was doing. A knock at the door made her sit up. "Come in," she called. The Duke entered. He'd changed from his formal clothes into a simple white shirt and dark trousers, his hair slightly disheveled. It was the most human she'd seen him look. "I wanted to thank you," he said without preamble, "for what you did with Caroline today." "I just talked to her." "No, you saw her." The Duke's expression was unreadable. "Most people look at her and see a problem, a burden. You looked at her and saw a person." Eliza didn't know what to say to that. The Duke moved to the window, staring out at the dark moors. "The custody hearing is in 2 weeks. The Harringtons have hired the best barristers money can buy. They're going to tear us apart in that courtroom." "What will they say?" "That I'm cold, unfeeling, incapable of providing a warm, nurturing home." His voice was flat. "That this marriage is a sham. That Caroline would be better off with them." "And is any of that true?" He looked at her, really looked at her. "Some of it." The honesty was startling. "I'm not good with emotions," he continued. "I don't know how to comfort a grieving child. I don't know how to be soft." He paused. "But I know how to fight, how to protect. And I will not let those people take her." Eliza stood, moving closer. "Then we'll fight together. You don't know what you're agreeing to." "I know exactly what I'm agreeing to." She met his eyes. "You need someone the court will believe. Someone who can show them that Caroline has a real home, a real family." "This isn't a real family." "It could be." The words surprised her even as she said them. We could make it one, not in the traditional sense, but something real, something stable, something worth fighting for. The Duke studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave, he said finally, or very foolish. Maybe both. For the first time, he almost smiled. Get some rest, Eliza. Tomorrow, the real work begins. He left, and Eliza stood alone in the dark room, wondering what she'd just committed herself to. The next 2 weeks were a brutal education in being a duchess. Mrs. Holloway ran Eliza through every aspect of managing Thornfield: household accounts, staff management, menu planning, social obligations. The older woman's disapproval was palpable. She made it clear through 1,000 tiny gestures that she considered Eliza an imposter, a nobody playing dress-up in a duchess's clothes. The previous duchess would never have approved such extravagance, that Mrs. Holloway said when Eliza suggested adding more candles to the nursery. The previous duchess is dead, Eliza replied quietly, and I'm not her. Mrs. Holloway's expression turned icy. Indeed, Your Grace, you're certainly not. But Eliza didn't have time to win over the housekeeper. She had to win over Caroline. Every morning, she joined the girl for breakfast in the nursery. She didn't force conversation, didn't demand smiles or affection. She just existed, present, patient, steady. At first, Caroline barely acknowledged her, but slowly, gradually, the girl started to open up. My mother used to read to me every night, Caroline said one evening as Eliza tucked her into bed. What was her favorite story? Eliza asked gently. The one about the girl who planted a garden in the snow. She said it was about hope. Caroline's voice cracked. But there's no hope in gardens. They just die. Eliza's heart ached. Sometimes they do, but sometimes if you keep watering them, keep believing in them, they come back. Have you ever planted a garden? No, Eliza admitted, but maybe we could try. Together. Caroline looked up at her, those two old eyes searching for lies. Why are you being nice to me? Because you deserve kindness. Uncle Alexander married you to keep me. Miss Petra told me. The girl's voice was flat. You're only here because he needs you. Eliza could have lied, could have spun some fairy tale about love and family and belonging, but Caroline had been lied to enough. You're right, Eliza said. Your uncle married me because he thought I could help him keep you safe. That's true. Caroline's face fell. But, Eliza continued, that doesn't mean I don't care about you. Those two things can both be true at once. I'm here because your uncle needed help. And I stay because I want to. Why? Because, Eliza said softly, I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like no one sees you, like you don't matter. She reached out carefully and took Caroline's hand. You matter, Caroline. And I see you. Caroline's eyes filled with tears, and then, for the first time since Eliza had arrived, the girl threw her arms around her and sobbed. Eliza held her, tight, let her cry, let her grieve. And when Miss Petra appeared in the doorway, Eliza looked up and saw tears on the governess's face, too. She hasn't cried since the funeral, Miss Petra whispered. We thought she'd forgotten how. But Caroline hadn't forgotten. She'd just been waiting for someone to tell her it was safe. 5 days before the hearing, the Harringtons arrived. They came in a gleaming black carriage, flanked by 2 barristers and an air of self-righteous fury. Lord Reginald Harrington was a portly man with thinning hair and the kind of entitled arrogance that came from generations of unearned wealth. His wife, Lady Beatrice, was thin and sharp-featured, her mouth pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. They swept into Thornfield like conquering generals. Where is she? Lord Harrington demanded the moment he entered the drawing room. Where's our granddaughter? The Duke stood by the fireplace, his expression carved from ice. Caroline is upstairs, resting. We want to see her, now. No. Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. You have no right to keep us from her. I have every right. I'm her legal guardian until the court decides otherwise. The Duke's voice was lethal. And you're not going anywhere near her without supervision. Supervision? Lord Harrington's face turned purple. We're her family. You're strangers who made her cry the last time you visited. You're not seeing her unsupervised. That's when Lady Beatrice's gaze landed on Eliza. And who is this? She asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Eliza stood, her spine straight, meeting the woman's hostile stare. I'm the Duchess of Blackthorn. Ah, yes, the hasty marriage. Lady Beatrice's smile was poisonous. How convenient. The Duke suddenly develops an interest in matrimony just weeks before a custody hearing. My marriage has nothing to do with your case, the Duke said coldly. Doesn't it? Come now, Your Grace. We're not fools. Lord Harrington stepped forward. You married this nobody to make yourself look respectable, to convince the court you can provide a stable home, but we've done our research. He pulled out a folder, slapping it down on a side table. Miss Eliza Whitmore, daughter of a ruined merchant, no dowry, no prospects, 5 years on the marriage market with not a single proposal. His smile was cruel. Tell me, Your Grace, what exactly do you bring to this union besides desperation? The words hit like bullets. Eliza felt the old shame rising, the familiar weight of being nothing, being worthless, being judged and found wanting. But then she looked at the Duke and saw cold fury in his eyes. Get out, he said quietly. We have a right. You have no rights here. The Duke's voice could have frozen steel. You insulted my wife in my home. You will leave. Now. And if you ever speak to her that way again, I will destroy you. The threat hung in the air. Lord Harrington's face went red. You can't. I absolutely can. I've brought down men with 10 times your power and half your arrogance. Don't test me. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lady Beatrice stood, her expression venomous. We'll see you in court, Your Grace. And when the judge sees through this pathetic charade, Caroline will finally have a proper home, with people who actually love her. They swept out, leaving a terrible silence behind. Eliza stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides, trying not to shake. Eliza. They're right, she said quietly. The Duke turned to her. What? They're right. I am nobody. I have nothing to offer. No connections, no breeding, nothing that makes me qualified to be a duchess or a mother or Stop. The command in his voice made her look up. The Duke crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping directly in front of her. You are not nobody, he said, his voice low and intense. You survived 5 years of hell with your dignity intact. You saw Caroline, really saw her, when everyone else just saw a problem. You're intelligent, observant, and brave enough to walk into a battlefield armed with nothing but determination. His gray eyes bored into hers. The Harringtons are right about one thing. This marriage was strategic, but they're wrong about everything else. You're not here because you're desperate. You're here because you're exactly what Caroline needs. What I need. Eliza's breath caught. So don't let those parasites make you doubt yourself, the Duke continued. Because in 5 days, we're walking into that courtroom, and we're going to win. How can you be so sure? Because, he said, we have something they don't. What? For the first time since she'd met him, the Duke's expression softened. The truth. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the Harringtons' words, the contempt in their voices, the certainty that she was nothing. Finally, she got up and wandered the dark halls of Thornfield, too restless to stay still. She found herself outside Caroline's room. The door was slightly ajar. Soft light spilled into the hallway. Eliza pushed it open. Caroline was awake, sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. Sweetheart, what's wrong? I heard them, Caroline whispered. The Harringtons, they were yelling. They said... Her voice broke. They said you and Uncle Alexander are lying, that you don't really want me. Eliza's heart shattered. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling Caroline into her arms. Listen to me, she said fiercely. Your uncle and I may have gotten married quickly. And yes, we did it because we wanted to keep you safe. But that doesn't make it a lie. But you don't love each other. No, not yet. Eliza pulled back, looking Caroline in the eye. But we both love you. And sometimes that's where families start. Not with romance, but with choice. With people deciding they want to protect each other, take care of each other. Caroline's tears slowed. Really? Really? Eliza brushed hair from the girl's face. And no matter what happens in that courtroom, no matter what the Harringtons say, you need to know this. You are wanted. You are loved. And we will fight for you with everything we have. Even if you lose, we won't lose. But what if we won't? Eliza's voice turned fierce. Because you deserve better than people who only want you for your inheritance. You deserve a home where you're safe, where you can grieve, where you can grow. And that's what we're going to give you. Caroline stared at her for a long moment, then quietly, I want you to stay, even after the hearing. Even if you and Uncle Alexander don't have to pretend anymore, I want you to stay. Eliza's throat closed. She'd walked into this marriage thinking it was temporary, a transaction with an expiration date. But looking at this brave, broken little girl, she realized something had changed. She didn't want to leave either. Then I'll stay, she whispered, for as long as you want me. Caroline hugged her tight, and standing in the doorway unnoticed, the Duke watched them both. His expression unreadable, but his hands, clenched at his sides, told a different story. This wasn't supposed to be real. But somewhere between strategic alliance and courtroom battle, it had become something else. Something neither of them had planned for, something terrifying and precious and worth protecting. Family. The Duke didn't move from the doorway for a long time after Caroline fell asleep in Eliza's arms. He just stood there in the shadows, watching his wife, his temporary, strategic wife, stroke his niece's hair with a tenderness that made something crack in his chest. This wasn't part of the plan. None of this was part of the plan. He'd married Eliza because she was invisible, controllable, a woman with nothing to lose who would play her role and leave when the curtain fell. He'd calculated every angle, anticipated every variable, prepared for every contingency, except this. Except watching her become the one thing Caroline needed most. Someone who saw her pain and didn't look away. Except realizing that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, his carefully constructed strategy had developed a heartbeat. Alexander turned and walked back to his study, closing the door with more force than necessary. He poured himself a whiskey, something he rarely did, and stared at the legal documents spread across his desk. The custody hearing was in 5 days. 5 days to convince the judge that he could provide a stable home. 5 days to prove the Harringtons wrong. 5 days to win a war he couldn't afford to lose. He drained the glass in one swallow. Then he sat down and began preparing for battle. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray, the sky threatening rain. Eliza stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the severe gray dress Mrs. Holloway had laid out. It was appropriate for court, respectable, modest, the kind of dress that whispered, "I am a proper duchess," without drawing attention. She hated it, but appearances mattered, especially today. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." The Duke entered, already dressed in formal black, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes went immediately to her, scanning her from head to toe with the kind of precision that made her feel like she was being inventoried. "Good," he said. "You look the part." "The part of what?" "A woman playing dress-up?" "The part of my wife." His voice was flat. "That's all that matters today." Eliza turned back to the mirror, fumbling with the clasp of a necklace. Her hands were shaking. The Duke crossed the room and took the necklace from her. "Let me." He fastened it around her throat, his fingers cool against her skin. They stood there for a moment, reflected in the mirror, the feared Duke and the invisible woman dressed like aristocracy, playing roles that felt both utterly false and strangely real. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "No." "Good. Neither am I." He stepped back. "That means we're paying attention." Eliza looked at him in the mirror. "What if we lose?" "We won't." "But what if we won't?" His voice turned hard. "Because losing isn't an option. Not today. Not with Caroline's future on the line." He walked to the door, then paused. "Eliza." She turned. "Thank you," he said. "For last night. For what you said to Caroline. For..." He seemed to struggle for words. "For being more than I had any right to expect." Then he left before she could respond, leaving Eliza standing alone, staring at her reflection, wondering who the woman in the mirror really was. The courthouse was a massive stone building in the heart of London, all imposing columns and cold marble floors. People filled the corridors, barristers in black robes, clerks carrying stacks of papers, observers waiting for their own cases. The air smelled like old paper and expensive cologne, and barely concealed desperation. Eliza walked beside the Duke, her hand resting lightly on his arm, playing the role they'd rehearsed. The devoted wife, the stable influence, the proof that Alexander Blackthorne had transformed from ruthless bachelor to responsible family man. It felt like a lie, but it also felt like the most important performance of her life. "There they are," the Duke murmured. Ahead, the Harringtons stood with their legal team, 3 barristers who looked like sharks in waistcoats, all sharp smiles and predatory confidence. Lord Harrington was speaking loudly to anyone who would listen, his voice carrying down the hall. "Sham marriage! Obvious ploy. The court will see through it." Lady Beatrice saw them approaching, and her expression turned venomous. "Your Grace," she said, the title dripping with contempt. "And the blushing bride, how quaint." Eliza felt the Duke's arm tense beneath her hand. "Lady Harrington," he said coldly, "spreading lies before the hearing even begins? How efficient." "Lies? We're simply stating facts." Lord Harrington stepped forward, his face flushed. "You married this nobody to manipulate the court. Everyone knows it." "Everyone knows," the Duke replied, his voice lethal, "that you only want Caroline for her inheritance. Shall we discuss facts, such as how you haven't visited her once since my brother's funeral until you needed her for your legal case?" Lord Harrington's face went purple. One of the Harrington barristers, a tall man with cold eyes, stepped between them. "Gentlemen, ladies, shall we save the theatrics for the courtroom?" "Looking forward to it," the Duke said. They moved past, but Eliza could feel the Harringtons' hatred burning into her back. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too big, too formal, too final. The judge's bench loomed at the front, dark wood and intimidating height. Rows of benches filled the space, some for observers, some for witnesses. At the back, Eliza caught sight of Miss Petra, sitting alone, her hands twisted in her lap, and Caroline. The girl sat beside her governess, wearing a pale blue dress, her dark hair pulled back. She looked so small in the cavernous room, so vulnerable. Their eyes met. Caroline gave her a trembling smile. Eliza's resolve hardened. They were going to win. They had to. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Pemberton." Everyone stood. The judge entered, an older man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything and believed nothing. He settled into his seat with the weariness of someone who'd presided over too many ugly custody battles. "Be seated," he said. "Let's begin." The Harringtons' lead barrister rose immediately, his voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. Lord and Lady Harrington are seeking custody of their granddaughter, Lady Caroline Blackthorne, currently under the guardianship of the Duke of Blackthorne. We will demonstrate that the Duke is unfit to provide the stable, nurturing environment a grieving child requires." He began laying out his case with surgical precision. The Duke's reputation for ruthlessness, his lack of warmth, his cold management of his estates, testimony from former servants describing Thornfield as austere and unwelcoming, documentation of the Duke's business dealings, aggressive, unforgiving, cutthroat. "This is not a man," the barrister concluded, "who can provide the love and care an orphan child desperately needs." Then came the twist. "Furthermore," the barrister continued, pulling out a new document, "we have evidence that the Duke's recent marriage is nothing more than a calculated fraud designed to manipulate this court." Eliza's heart stopped. The barrister approached the bench, handing papers to the judge. "We have testimony from multiple sources, including the Duchess's own aunt, confirming that this marriage was arranged mere weeks before this hearing, that Miss Whitmore had no prior relationship with the Duke, that she was essentially purchased to play the role of devoted wife." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The Duke's expression didn't change, but Eliza felt him go rigid beside her. "Your Honor," the barrister pressed, "this marriage is a sham, a theatrical performance designed to deceive this court into believing the Duke has reformed. But a man doesn't change his nature in a matter of weeks. He simply hires better actors." The judge looked at the Duke, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace, do you wish to respond?" Alexander stood slowly. "My marriage," he said, his voice cold and controlled, is none of this court's business unless it directly impacts my ability to care for my niece, which it does, positively. My wife has formed a genuine bond with Caroline. She provides the warmth and stability this court is so concerned about. A bond formed in 2 weeks? The Harrington barrister's smile was sharp. How convenient, how utterly unbelievable. Belief, the Duke replied, is not required. Only evidence, which we will provide. The judge raised a hand. We'll hear testimony, starting with the Duchess of Blackthorn. Eliza's blood turned to ice. They were calling her to testify, now. The Duke's barrister, a stern woman named Mrs. Ashford, stood quickly. Your Honor, the Duchess was not on our witness list. She's relevant to the case, the judge said. I'll allow it. Your Grace, please approach. Eliza stood on shaking legs. This wasn't part of the plan. They'd prepared the Duke's testimony, character witnesses, documentation. They hadn't expected her to be called. The Duke caught her hand, squeezed once. You can do this. Eliza walked to the witness stand, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The Harrington barrister circled her like a predator. Your Grace, he began, his tone dripping with false politeness. How long have you known the Duke of Blackthorn? 3 weeks. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. 3 weeks. And you married him after how long? 1 week. More whispers, louder now. Forgive me, Your Grace, but that seems rather hasty, almost desperate, one might say. Objection, Mrs. Ashford called. Badgering. I'll rephrase, the barrister said smoothly. Why did you marry the Duke so quickly? Eliza's mind raced. She could lie, spin some fairy tale about love at first sight. But Caroline was watching, and Caroline deserved the truth. Because he offered me something I desperately needed, Eliza said clearly. Security, a future, a way out of poverty and obscurity. The courtroom went silent. So you admit, the barrister pressed, triumph in his voice, that this marriage was a transaction. I admit that it began as one, yes. And has anything changed since then? Eliza looked at Caroline, at the Duke, at the future hanging in the balance. Everything has changed, she said quietly. The barrister paused, thrown off balance. I married the Duke for practical reasons, Eliza continued. That's true. But in the past 2 weeks, I've watched him fight for his niece with everything he has. I've seen him put her needs above his pride, his reputation, everything. I've watched Caroline slowly come back to life in his presence, in our presence. Her voice strengthened. You want to know if this marriage is real? It's more real than half the so-called love matches in London, because it's built on something stronger than romance. It's built on choice, on commitment, on two people deciding that a little girl's future is worth fighting for. How touching, the barrister said dryly. But emotion doesn't change facts. You're a woman with no experience raising children, no qualifications, nothing to recommend you as a guardian. I'm a woman who sees Caroline as a person, not a prize, Eliza interrupted, her voice sharp. Which is more than I can say for her grandparents. Objection. Sustained. Your Grace, please limit yourself to answering questions. But Eliza wasn't done. You want to know my qualifications? I've spent 5 years invisible, watching, learning how people work, how they lie, how they hurt each other. I learned to survive in a world that wanted me to disappear. And now I'm using everything I learned to make sure Caroline never feels that way, never feels invisible, never feels like she doesn't matter. She looked directly at Lord and Lady Harrington. Can her grandparents say the same? The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! The Harrington barrister was sputtering, trying to regain control. But Eliza had already said what she needed to say. She'd told the truth. And truth, she was learning, was the most dangerous weapon of all. After a brief recess, the hearing continued. The Harringtons called their witnesses. Former Thornfield servants who testified to the Duke's cold management, his lack of warmth, his intimidating presence. They painted a picture of a man who ruled through fear, who had no capacity for gentleness or love. Then Mrs. Ashford called Miss Petra. The governess walked to the stand with quiet dignity, her hands clasped in front of her. Miss Petra, Mrs. Ashford began, you've been Lady Caroline's governess since the accident. Can you describe her state when she first arrived at Thornfield? She was broken, Miss Petra said softly. She wouldn't speak, barely ate. She just existed, like a ghost. And has that changed? Yes, dramatically. Miss Petra looked at the Duke and Eliza. When His Grace first took custody, he didn't know how to reach her, but he tried. Every day. He read to her even when she wouldn't respond, sat with her through nightmares, never gave up. And the Duchess? Miss Petra's expression softened. Her Grace changed everything. She didn't try to replace Caroline's mother. She just saw her, really saw her, and Caroline responded. For the first time since the accident, she started talking again, smiling, healing. In your professional opinion, is Lady Caroline better off with the Duke and Duchess? Without question, Miss Petra's voice was firm. The Harringtons visited once. They made Caroline cry, then left. They haven't contacted her since. His Grace and Her Grace are there every day. They're building a home, a real home. The Harrington barrister tried to shake her testimony, but Miss Petra held firm. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. I'd like to call Lady Caroline Blackthorne to testify, the judge said. Eliza's heart stopped. Your Honor, the Duke stood immediately. She's 8 years old. She's been through tremendous trauma. She's the subject of this custody battle, the judge said. I need to hear from her directly. Caroline walked to the stand looking even smaller than before. She was shaking. Eliza wanted to run to her, to shield her, to take her away from this terrible room and these terrible people who saw her as property, but all she could do was sit and watch. The judge leaned forward, his voice gentler than before. Caroline, I know this is scary, but I need to ask you some questions. Can you do that for me? Caroline nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. Good girl. Now, do you understand why we're here today? You're deciding where I'm going to live. That's right, and I need to know what you want. Where do you feel safest? Happiest? Caroline's hands twisted in her lap. With Uncle Alexander. And your new aunt, the Duchess? For the first time, Caroline smiled. Her too. She tells me stories. And she promised to plant a garden with me. Do you want to live with your grandparents? Caroline's smile vanished. She looked at the Harringtons, and fear flickered across her face. They scare me, she whispered. They came after Mama and Papa died, and they yelled. They said I was theirs now, like I was a thing they owned. Lord Harrington shot to his feet. That's a lie. We never... Sit down, the judge barked. Lady Caroline, continue. Uncle Alexander doesn't yell, Caroline said, her voice growing stronger. And Aunt Eliza listens. She doesn't try to make me forget Mama and Papa. She just lets me be sad when I need to be sad, and happy when I can be happy. Tears were streaming down her face now. I want to stay with them, she said. Please, I want to stay. The courtroom was silent. Even the Harringtons' barrister had no questions. Caroline was led back to her seat by Miss Petra, and the judge called a recess to deliberate. Eliza met the Duke outside in the hallway. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. Everything rested on the judge's decision now. She was brave, Eliza finally said. She learned that from you, the Duke replied. Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Ashford appeared, her expression grim. We have a problem. The Duke tensed. What? The Harringtons just filed a motion. They're claiming new evidence that proves the marriage is fraudulent. She handed him a document. They have a signed statement from your aunt, Eliza, describing how the Duke approached you with a business proposition, how the marriage was negotiated like a contract, how you were essentially hired. That's all true, Eliza said quietly. Mrs. Ashford's face fell. Then we're in trouble. If the judge sees this, he might rule that the marriage was indeed a sham, which undermines our entire case. Can we suppress it? The Duke asked. Not without lying to the court, which I won't do. The Duke's jaw tightened. Then we tell the truth. Alexander, Eliza started. No, they want to paint us as liars? Fine, we'll show them exactly what honesty looks like. He turned and walked back into the courtroom. When the hearing reconvened, the Harrington barrister was practically glowing with triumph. Your Honor, we have new evidence that conclusively proves... I'd like to address that evidence, the Duke interrupted, standing. The judge raised an eyebrow. Your Grace, the Harringtons are correct. My marriage to Eliza was initially a strategic arrangement. I needed a wife to strengthen my custody case. She needed security and a future. We made an agreement. Gasps filled the courtroom. Mrs. Ashford looked like she might faint. The Harrington barrister's smile was victorious. So, you admit— I admit, the Duke continued, his voice cutting through the noise, that our marriage began as a transaction. What I don't admit is that it remained one. He looked at Eliza. I married Eliza Whitmore because I thought she would play a role, be useful, help me win this case, and then disappear into the background of my life. His voice softened. But she didn't do any of those things. Eliza's breath caught. She saw Caroline's pain and didn't flinch from it, the Duke continued. She stood up to the Harringtons when they tried to intimidate her. She turned a cold, empty house into something that felt like a home. She became exactly what Caroline needed, not a replacement mother, but a steady presence who refused to give up. He turned back to the judge. So yes, our marriage began as strategy, but it became something else, something real. And whether this court believes that or not, Caroline does. And that's all that matters. The courtroom was silent. The judge studied the Duke for a long moment. I'll take this new evidence under advisement, he said finally. This court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when I'll deliver my ruling. The gavel fell, and everyone filed out in stunned silence. That night, back at Thornfield, Eliza found herself in the library, unable to sleep. She stood by the window, watching the moon paint silver across the dark moors, replaying the Duke's words over and over. It became something real. Had it? Or was he just saying what needed to be said to win the case? You should be resting. She turned. The Duke stood in the doorway, still dressed, exhaustion written in the lines of his face. So should you, she said. He crossed the room, joining her at the window. For a moment, they stood in silence. Did you mean it? Eliza asked quietly. What you said in court. Every word. Even the part about— Every word, he repeated, his voice firm. This marriage may have started as strategy, Eliza, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being a performance. He turned to face her. You terrify me, he said, because I didn't plan for this. Didn't prepare for someone who could see through my walls, who could make me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. Like what? Like a real marriage, a real family, a life that's more than just power and control and winning. Eliza's heart hammered. Alexander, tomorrow the judge will make his decision. And whatever happens, I want you to know something. His gray eyes held hers. You're not hired help. You're not a strategy. You're my wife. And if you'll have me, I'd like to make this real, truly real. Not for the court, not for Caroline, for us. Eliza couldn't breathe. This was the moment, the choice. She could say no, could hold on to the safety of their original agreement, could protect herself from the risk of actually caring, or she could take the terrifying leap into something unknown. Yes, she whispered. The Duke's expression transformed, not a smile exactly, but something close. He reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. And for the first time since this whole chaotic journey began, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. But hope, as she was about to learn, was a dangerous thing. Because the next morning, everything shattered. They arrived at the courthouse early, Caroline between them, holding both their hands. The girl was nervous but determined, her chin lifted in unconscious imitation of her uncle. The courtroom filled quickly. The Harringtons arrived with their barristers, their expressions confident, too confident. Something was wrong. The judge entered, his face unreadable. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence, he began. This has been a complex case with compelling arguments on both sides. Eliza's grip tightened on Caroline's hand. However, the judge continued, I must rule based on the best interests of the child. And in this case, the courtroom doors burst open. A man strode in, tall, disheveled, wild-eyed. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and the same gray eyes as the Duke. Alexander went white. No. The man's smile was unhinged. Hello, brother, did you miss me? The courtroom erupted in chaos. Because the dead had just walked in. Thomas Blackthorne, the Duke's younger brother, Caroline's father, the man who'd supposedly died 6 months ago in a carriage accident. was alive. Caroline's scream tore through the courtroom like a blade. "Papa!" She ripped her hand free from Eliza's grip and ran, not toward the man in the doorway, away from him, toward the back of the courtroom where Miss Petra caught her and pulled her close, the girl's entire body shaking with sobs. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Voices overlapping, people standing, the bailiff shouting for order. But all Eliza could focus on was the Duke's face, frozen in an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted shock. "Thomas," Alexander whispered. The man who claimed to be Thomas Blackthorne stood swaying in the doorway, his clothes rumpled and stained, his face gaunt. He looked like a corpse that had crawled out of its grave. Wild eyes darted around the room before landing on the Duke. "Surprised, brother?" His voice was hoarse, cracking. "I bet you are. I bet you thought you'd gotten rid of me permanently." "Order!" The judge's gavel slammed down repeatedly. "Order in this court, or I'll have it cleared." The noise dimmed but didn't stop. Whispers snaked through the crowd like poison. Lord Harrington was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage. Who is this man?" "I'm Thomas Blackthorne," the man shouted. "That little girl's father, and I've come to take back what was stolen from me." Alexander finally moved. He stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled, but Eliza could see the tremor in his hands. She'd never seen him shake before. "Bailiff," the judge commanded, "verify this man's identity immediately. Everyone else, sit down and be silent or face contempt charges." The courtroom settled into a tense, brittle quiet. Two bailiffs approached Thomas cautiously. He submitted to their questions with an unsettling mixture of compliance and mania, pulling documents from his coat pocket, papers so crumpled and stained they looked like they'd been buried with him. Eliza watched Alexander. His face had gone from shock to something else, something calculating. His eyes tracked every movement Thomas made, cataloging, assessing, looking for the lie, because this had to be a lie. The bailiff returned to the judge, whispering urgently. The judge's expression darkened. "Mr. Blackthorne," the judge said carefully, "you claim to be Thomas Edward Blackthorne, deceased as of 6 months ago following a carriage accident that also claimed your wife, Lady Margaret Blackthorne." "I'm not deceased." Thomas's laugh was unhinged. "Obviously, though my dear brother certainly tried to make it so." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Thomas lurched forward, and the bailiffs grabbed his arms. "He wanted me gone, wanted my daughter, wanted my inheritance. So he arranged the accident, paid off the authorities, had me declared dead." "Enough!" Alexander's voice cut through the courtroom like ice. "Your Honor, this man is clearly delusional. I don't know who he is or what game he's playing, but my brother is dead. I identified his body myself." "Did you?" Thomas's smile was feral. "Or did you identify some poor soul you paid to take my place? Tell me, Alexander, how much does a dead man cost these days?" The courtroom erupted again. Eliza's mind raced. She looked at Caroline, still sobbing in Miss Petra's arms, her face buried in the governess's shoulder. The girl wasn't running to her supposedly resurrected father. She was running away from him. That told Eliza everything she needed to know. "Your Honor," Eliza stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "May I approach?" The judge looked startled. "Your Grace, this is highly irregular. So is a dead man walking into a custody hearing." She moved forward before anyone could stop her. "If this man is truly Thomas Blackthorne, there's a simple way to verify it." Thomas's eyes locked onto her. "And who are you?" "I'm the Duchess of Blackthorne, Alexander's wife." She kept her voice steady, though her heart was hammering. "And if you're Caroline's father, you should be able to answer basic questions about her, things only a parent would know. I don't have to prove anything to you. Then prove it to your daughter." Eliza gestured toward Caroline. "She's right there. Go to her. Comfort her. Say something only her father would say." Thomas's eyes darted to Caroline, and for just a moment, Eliza saw it. Hesitation, uncertainty, fear. "She's traumatized," he said. "She doesn't recognize me because I've been held prisoner for 6 months, starved, beaten." "By whom?" the Duke asked coldly. "By your hired men." "Name one," Thomas faltered. The trauma. I don't remember." "Convenient." Alexander moved toward him with predatory focus. Tell me, Thomas, if that's who you really are, where's the scar? What scar? The one on your left shoulder, from when you fell off your horse at age 12. 3 inches long, just above the collarbone. The Duke's voice was scalpel sharp. Every member of our family knows about it, so show us. The color drained from Thomas's face. It healed. Scars don't heal. They fade, but they don't disappear. Alexander was close now, towering over the smaller man. Show us the scar, or admit you're a fraud. This is absurd. Lord Harrington stood again. Your Honor, whether this man is Thomas Blackthorne or not, he's raised reasonable doubts about the Duke's character. We move for an immediate suspension of the Duke's guardianship pending investigation. Seconded, Thomas said quickly. Too quickly. And that's when Eliza saw it. The glance between Thomas and Lord Harrington. Brief, coordinated, rehearsed. Your Honor, she said clearly, I request a recess. 1 hour. To gather evidence that will conclusively prove this man's identity, or lack thereof. The judge studied her, then the chaos unfolding in his courtroom. Granted. 1 hour. And when we reconvene, I want answers. Real ones. His gavel fell. Court is in recess. The moment they were in the private consultation room, Alexander slammed his fist into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. It's impossible, he said, his voice raw. I saw the bodies. Both of them. Margaret was... There was no question, and Thomas was beside her, burned beyond recognition, but his ring, his clothing, the carriage wreckage, everything confirmed it was him. Then this man is an imposter, Eliza said. Obviously, but who? And why now? Why wait 6 months? Mrs. Ashford paced the small room, her mind clearly racing. The Harringtons, it has to be. They knew they were losing the custody case, so they hired someone to impersonate Thomas. To what end? The Duke demanded. Even if they succeed in suspending my guardianship temporarily, I can prove he's a fraud within days, within hours probably. Unless that's not the point. Eliza's mind was working furiously, connecting pieces. What if the goal isn't to take Caroline permanently? What if it's just to create enough chaos and doubt that the judge rules against you on character grounds alone? Alexander's eyes sharpened. Meaning they don't need their fake Thomas to be convincing long term. They just need him to be convincing enough to destroy your credibility today, to make the judge believe you're capable of the things this man is accusing you of. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, kidnapping. Mrs. Ashford's face was pale. Even unfounded, those accusations are devastating. So we prove he's lying, the Duke said flatly. Now, we have 1 hour. How? Mrs. Ashford asked. What evidence can we possibly gather in 60 minutes? Eliza thought of Caroline's reaction, the terror on her face, the way she'd run from the man claiming to be her father. Caroline knows, she said quietly. Alexander looked at her sharply. What? Caroline knows he's not her father. That's why she ran, not from grief or trauma, from fear of a stranger. Eliza turned to him. We need to talk to her. Find out what she saw, what she knows. She's 8 years old and already traumatized. She's also the only witness to that accident who survived, Eliza interrupted. And if there's something about that man that proves he's not Thomas, she'll know it. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Let's go. They found Caroline in a small waiting room with Miss Petra. The girl was curled in the governess's lap, her face blotchy and tear-stained. When she saw them, she reached out immediately. Aunt Eliza. Eliza gathered her close, feeling the girl's racing heartbeat against her chest. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. Alexander knelt beside them. Caroline, I need to ask you something important. Can you be brave for me? Caroline nodded against Eliza's shoulder. That man out there. The one who says he's your father. Have you ever seen him before? No. Her voice was muffled but certain. Are you sure? Yes. Papa had different eyes. Warmer. And his voice was... She started crying again. Eliza stroked her hair. It's okay. You're doing so well. There's something else, Caroline whispered. Something wrong with him. What do you mean? The Duke asked gently. Papa had a watch, a gold pocket watch with our family crest. He wore it every day. Mama gave it to him. Caroline looked up, her eyes red but determined. That man doesn't have it. Alexander went very still. Are you certain? Yes. I saw his pocket when he came in. It was empty. The Duke stood abruptly. Miss Petra, did my brother have that watch on him when they found the bodies? Miss Petra's face was grave. No, Your Grace. It wasn't recovered. The authorities assumed it was destroyed in the fire or stolen after. But it wasn't. Alexander's voice turned sharp.
Because
Thomas would never have traveled without it, which means either he wasn't in that carriage.
He stopped. His face went white. Or someone took it from him before he died, Eliza finished quietly. The implications hung in the air like poison. There's more, Caroline said, her voice small. I remember, before the accident, Mama and Papa were fighting. Papa said someone was following us, watching the house. He was scared. Did he say who? Alexander demanded. Caroline shook her head, but I heard him tell Mama that he'd made a mistake, that he'd trusted the wrong people, that Grandfather and Grandmother Harrington were, she struggled for the word, dangerous. Alexander and Eliza exchanged glances. Caroline, Eliza said carefully, this is very important. Can you tell us exactly what happened the day of the accident? The girl's breathing quickened, but she nodded. We were going to the country house. Papa was driving fast, too fast. Mama told him to slow down, but he said we had to get away, that they were coming. Who was coming? I don't know. But Papa kept looking back, like someone was chasing us. Tears streamed down her face. Then the wheel broke, the carriage flipped, I hit my head. When I woke up, Mama and Papa were. She couldn't continue, but she'd said enough. The wheel broke, Alexander repeated slowly. Not an accident, sabotage. We need proof, Mrs. Ashford said. Speculation won't hold up in court. Then we get proof. The Duke's expression was deadly. The carriage wreckage. Where is it? Impounded by the magistrate's office, pending investigation, Mrs. Ashford replied. But that investigation was closed months ago when the deaths were ruled accidental. Then we reopen it. Alexander turned to Miss Petra. Stay with Caroline. Keep her safe. Don't let anyone near her, especially not that imposter or the Harringtons. Your Grace, do it. He looked at Eliza. We have 40 minutes. Can you keep the judge occupied? Eliza straightened. What are you going to do? Something I should have done 6 months ago. His voice was cold fury barely contained. Find out who really killed my brother. He strode out, leaving Eliza with a choice, trust him or follow protocol. She chose trust. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was venomous. The Harringtons sat with their imposter Thomas, whispering urgently. News of the disruption had spread, and the gallery was packed with observers, journalists, society gossips, all hungry for scandal. Eliza walked in alone, and every eye turned to her. Lord Harrington's smile was triumphant. Where's your husband, Your Grace? Run off, has he? How telling. He's gathering evidence, Eliza replied calmly, taking her seat. Evidence of what? His crimes. Evidence that will expose the real criminals in this courtroom. Thomas stood abruptly. You dare! Sit down, Eliza said, her voice sharp. You're not Thomas Blackthorne. You're a hired actor playing a role, and you're not very good at it. I don't have to listen to this. No, but you'll have to listen to the judge when he charges you with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. She looked at Lord Harrington. All of you. Lady Harrington's face went pale. These accusations are baseless, are they? Then explain how your hired imposter knew to appear today, how he got papers documenting Thomas's identity, how he knew exactly what accusations to make to cause maximum damage to the Duke's case. Coincidence? There are no coincidences in courtrooms, only conspiracies. Eliza stood, addressing the room. The Harringtons knew they were losing, so they hired this man to impersonate a dead man, create chaos, and undermine the Duke's character. It's fraud. It's witness tampering, and it's about to be exposed. The gallery erupted in excited whispers. The judge entered, his expression thunderous. I said 1 hour, not a circus. Where's the Duke? On his way, Your Honor, Eliza said, with evidence. He has 5 minutes, or I'm ruling in favor of the Harringtons by default due to his failure to appear. The courtroom doors crashed open. Alexander strode in, covered in dust and soot, carrying a leather satchel. Behind him, 2 constables followed, along with a man Eliza didn't recognize, middle-aged in an inspector's uniform. Your Honor, the Duke said, I apologize for the delay, but I believe you'll find it was necessary. He dumped the contents of the satchel onto the evidence table, a scorched, twisted piece of metal, a broken wheel hub, and a gold pocket watch, charred but intact, the family crest still visible. This, Alexander said, pointing to the wheel hub, is from the carriage that supposedly killed my brother. Notice the axle. It wasn't broken from impact. It was cut, deliberately. Someone sabotaged this carriage to cause an accident. Gasps filled the courtroom. And this, he held up the watch, belonged to Thomas. It was found not in the carriage wreckage, but in a pawn shop 3 miles from the accident site. Sold 2 days after the crash. He turned to the inspector. Inspector Graves, would you tell the court what else you found? The inspector stepped forward, his face grim. We reopened the investigation into the Blackthorn carriage accident based on new evidence provided by His Grace. Our findings confirm sabotage. Furthermore, we traced the pocket watch sale to a man named Bernard Cross, a known criminal with ties to hired violence. And who hired Mr. Cross? The Duke asked. Inspector Graves pulled out a document. According to his testimony, given in exchange for reduced charges, he was hired by an intermediary acting on behalf of Lord and Lady Harrington. The courtroom exploded. Lord Harrington shot to his feet. This is lies. Slander. We would never— You murdered my brother. Alexander's voice was ice and fury. You arranged his death to get custody of Caroline and her inheritance. And when that didn't work, when I fought you in court, you hired this fraud to impersonate him and destroy my credibility. Thomas, or whoever he was, tried to run. The bailiffs caught him before he reached the door. I want a lawyer, he shouted. They promised me immunity. There is no immunity for murder, the judge roared. Bailiff, arrest Lord and Lady Harrington immediately. This is an outrage. I can and I am. You are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and perjury. The judge's voice shook with rage. Your custody petition is denied, permanently. Lady Harrington's face crumpled. Lord Harrington turned on Thomas. You fool! You incompetent! You said it would work, Thomas screamed back. You said— The bailiffs dragged them all away, their shouts echoing through the courthouse. Silence fell. The judge looked at Alexander, his expression unreadable. Your Grace, he said quietly, I owe you an apology, and I owe your niece justice. I don't want apologies, Alexander said, his voice hoarse. I want my daughter safe. Your niece, my daughter. The Duke's voice was steel. Caroline has lost enough. She doesn't need another stranger in her life. She needs a father, and I intend to be one. The judge studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Custody is awarded to Alexander Blackthorn, Duke of Blackthorn, and his wife, the Duchess Eliza Blackthorn, permanent and irrevocable. His gavel fell. This court is adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. Then Eliza was running, not caring about decorum, not caring who saw. She ran to Caroline, scooped the girl into her arms, and held her tight. It's over, she whispered. You're safe. You're staying with us. Forever. Caroline sobbed into her shoulder. Promise? Promise. Alexander joined them, his arms wrapping around them both. For the first time since Eliza had met him, his face showed something other than cold control. Relief, grief, love. We won, he said quietly. No, Eliza corrected. We survived. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed, shouting questions. Observers pointed and whispered. The scandal would dominate London society for months. The murdered heir, the conspirator grandparents, the impostor's dramatic arrest. But Eliza didn't care. Because in the carriage on the way back to Thornfield, Caroline fell asleep between them, her hand clutching Eliza's, her head resting on Alexander's shoulder. Safe, loved, home. Thank you, Alexander said quietly, so as not to wake her. For what? For seeing what I couldn't, for pushing when I wanted to retreat, for... He looked down at Caroline, for giving her a mother when she needed one most. Eliza's throat tightened. I didn't do it alone. No, but you started it. You made this possible. His gray eyes met hers. You made us possible. The carriage rolled through the countryside as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 3 weeks ago, Eliza had been invisible, a failure, a burden. Now she was a duchess, a mother, a wife. Not because someone gave her those titles, but because she'd fought for them, and won. That night, after Caroline was asleep and the household had settled into quiet, Eliza found Alexander in his study. He was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the dark moors. Can't sleep? She asked. Too much has happened. My mind won't stop. He turned to look at her. What about you? Same. She moved to join him. I keep thinking about what Inspector Graves said, about the conspiracy, about how long the Harringtons must have been planning this. They saw an opportunity and took it. That's what predators do. His voice was bitter. I should have seen it coming. Should have protected Thomas better. You couldn't have known. I should have. He drained the whiskey. I was so focused on business, on building power, on winning every battle that I forgot the people who mattered. Thomas tried to tell me something was wrong, tried to warn me. I was too busy to listen. Alexander, he died because I failed him. The words were raw. And Caroline almost paid the price for my blindness. Eliza took the glass from his hand and set it down. Then she took both his hands in hers. You didn't fail him. The Harringtons killed him. That's on them, not you. Her voice was firm. And yes, maybe you could have paid more attention. Maybe you could have seen the signs. But you can't change the past. You can only choose what you do now. And what should I do? Be the father Caroline needs. Be the husband I chose. Be the man who learned from his mistakes and became better because of them. She squeezed his hands. That's all any of us can do. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Good thing I'm not here because you deserve me. She held him just as tightly. I'm here because I choose to be. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd started as strangers, become allies, and somehow transformed into something neither had expected. A family, built not on blood or obligation, but on choice, and that made it stronger than any bond forged by birth. The following week, London society was in chaos. The scandal of the Harrington conspiracy dominated every conversation, every newspaper, every whispered exchange in drawing rooms across the city. The Duke of Blackthorn, once feared as cold and ruthless, was now seen as a victim of a murderous plot. A devoted uncle who'd fought to protect his orphaned niece. A man who'd exposed corruption and brought criminals to justice. His reputation transformed overnight. And Eliza, the invisible wallflower, was now the duchess who'd stood beside him through it all. The woman who'd helped solve the conspiracy. The mother figure who'd won Caroline's traumatized heart. Invitations poured in. Requests for audiences. Letters of support and congratulations. But Eliza and Alexander ignored them all. They stayed at Thornfield with Caroline, building the life they'd fought so hard to protect. One morning, Eliza woke to find Caroline standing by her bed, a small smile on her face. Aunt Eliza. Good morning, sweetheart. Can we plant that garden today? The one you promised? Eliza sat up, her heart full. Absolutely. They spent the morning in the cold spring air digging in the earth beside the house. Alexander joined them, his formal clothes abandoned for simple work attire, dirt under his fingernails, actual laughter in his voice as Caroline insisted on planting flowers in a pattern that spelled her name. Mrs. Holloway watched from a window, her expression softer than Eliza had ever seen it. Miss Petra joined them with tea and sandwiches, sitting on a bench and smiling at the scene. And for the first time since arriving at Thornfield, Eliza felt it. This wasn't just a house. It was a home. That evening, as they washed dirt from their hands and Caroline chattered excitedly about watching the garden grow, Alexander pulled Eliza aside. I have something for you, he said. He handed her a small box. Inside was a ring. Not the one he'd given her at their hasty wedding, a simple band meant for practicality. This one was different, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and personal and chosen with care. "It's not about strategy," he said quietly. "It's not about the court or custody or proving anything to anyone. It's just because I want you to have something that's yours. That means something." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, you don't have to wear it. You don't have to—" She kissed him. It was their first real kiss, not for show, not for the court, not for anyone but themselves. When they pulled apart, he was smiling, truly smiling. "I'll take that as a yes," he said. "It's a yes to everything," she replied. "To the ring, to this marriage, to this life we're building. Even though it's complicated and messy and nothing like what you imagined. Especially because of that." She looked at the ring, at the man who'd given it to her, at the house that had become her home. "I spent 5 years invisible, waiting for someone to see me. You didn't just see me, Alexander. You chose me. And that makes all the difference." They stood together in the fading light, two people who'd married for strategy and stayed for love. And in that moment, Eliza understood something profound. She wasn't the Duchess because of a title or a ceremony or a piece of paper. She was the Duchess because she'd earned it, through courage, through choice, through refusing to disappear when the world wanted her gone. She'd fought for this family, and now, finally, it was hers. 3 months after the trial, London society still hadn't stopped talking. But the conversation had changed. Eliza stood in the drawing room of their London townhouse, not Aunt Georgiana's cramped residence, but the Blackthorne family's grand estate in Mayfair, reading the morning papers while Caroline practiced piano in the next room. The girl's playing was hesitant but improving, each note a small victory over the silence that had consumed her for so long. The headlines were predictable. Harrington conspiracy trial continues. Lord Harrington denies murder charges. Society divided on Blackthorne scandal. But beneath the scandal coverage was something else, something that made Eliza's breath catch, a society column, written by the infamous Lady Whistledown, the anonymous gossip who could make or break reputations with a single paragraph. "One cannot help but admire the Duchess of Blackthorne," it read. "A woman who entered society as nobody and emerged as the very definition of somebody, not through birth or fortune, but through courage, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. She has transformed the cold Duke into a devoted father, turned a house of shadows into a home of light, and exposed a conspiracy that would have condemned an innocent child to monsters. If this is what invisibility looks like, perhaps we should all aspire to disappear." Eliza read it twice, then a third time. "You're smiling." She looked up. Alexander stood in the doorway, dressed for business, but his eyes were soft in a way they never used to be. "Lady Whistledown approves of me, apparently. Lady Whistledown is late to the party." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "I approved of you months ago. You married me out of desperation. I married you out of strategy. I fell in love with you out of inevitability." He glanced at the paper. "Though I suppose public approval doesn't hurt. Does it matter what they think?" Alexander considered. "It matters to Caroline. She'll grow up in this world, and the fact that her family is respected rather than reviled will make her life easier." As if summoned, Caroline appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement. "Uncle Alexander, Aunt Eliza, Mrs. Holloway says we have visitors." "Who?" Eliza asked. "Everyone." Caroline grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the entrance hall. "Come see." The entrance hall was indeed filled with people. Miss Petra stood near the door, looking overwhelmed. Mrs. Holloway was attempting to maintain order as servants took coats and hats. And standing in the center of the chaos were faces Eliza recognized from her years of invisibility. Lady Helena Morgan, Lord Ashford, the Dowager Countess of Ravenhill, and most surprisingly, Lady Constance Harrow, the woman who'd mocked Eliza at that fateful ball, who'd made her feel worthless with a single cutting remark. They'd all come to call. Lady Helena stepped forward first, her expression warm but cautious. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. We hoped you might be receiving." Eliza's mind raced. 6 months ago, these people wouldn't have acknowledged her existence. Now they stood in her entrance hall, waiting for her permission to stay. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Of course, Eliza said smoothly. Please, come to the drawing room. Mrs. Holloway, tea for our guests. As they settled into the elegant space, Eliza watched them carefully. They were nervous, uncertain, seeking something from her. Approval? Forgiveness? Alliance? The Dowager Countess spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms. Your Grace, we've come to offer our support. The way you've been treated by certain members of society, the Harringtons in particular, is unconscionable. We want you to know that you have allies. Allies? Eliza repeated carefully. How kind, though I don't recall having many allies when I needed them most. The room went quiet. Lady Constance flushed. Your Grace, if you're referring to past discourtesies, I deeply regret— Do you? Eliza's voice was soft but sharp. Do you regret the mockery? The contempt? Or do you simply regret that the woman you dismissed is now someone you need to impress? Constance's mouth opened and closed. That is— Let me be clear, Eliza continued, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision. I appreciate your visit, but I'm not interested in collecting fair-weather friends who only appeared after I proved my worth. Caroline deserves better than that. I deserve better than that. We understand, Lady Helena said quietly, and you're right to be cautious, but we're not here just for social advantage. We're here because what you did, exposing the Harrington conspiracy, fighting for Caroline, refusing to be diminished, it matters. It changed something. What did it change? The rules. The Dowager Countess leaned forward. You proved that power doesn't only come from birth or money, that intelligence and courage can defeat privilege and corruption. That's dangerous to the old order and inspiring to those of us who felt trapped by it. Eliza studied the older woman. Are you saying you felt trapped? You, who control half the marriage market through sheer force of will? Control isn't the same as freedom, Your Grace. The Dowager's smile was sad. I've spent 40 years playing by rules written by men who saw women as property. You broke those rules and survived. That's more than inspiring, it's revolutionary. The words hung in the air. Caroline, who'd been quietly listening from her seat beside Eliza, spoke up. Aunt Eliza is the bravest person I know. She stood up to bad people who were much bigger and stronger, and she won. Yes, she did, Lady Helena agreed, which is why we're here, to learn from her, and to offer whatever support she'll accept. Eliza looked at these women, powerful, privileged, complicated. A few months ago, she would have given anything for their acceptance. Now, she wasn't sure she needed it, but maybe, she thought, that's exactly why she could afford to give them a chance. Then here's what I'll accept, she said. Honesty. If you're here because you believe in what we're fighting for, fairness, justice, protecting children, then stay. If you're here to climb the social ladder on my back, leave now. Lady Constance stood. For a moment, Eliza thought she was leaving. Instead, she curtsied, deeply, genuinely. Your Grace, I was cruel to you. Not because you deserved it, but because I was taught that anyone beneath me in status deserved contempt. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. She straightened. I'd like to do better, if you'll let me. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. Then stay, Eliza said, and let's see if we can build something better than what came before. The visit lasted another hour, filled with careful conversation and tentative alliance building. By the time the guests left, Eliza was exhausted, but strangely hopeful. That was well done, Alexander said, appearing from his study where he'd been strategically absent. You handled them perfectly. Did I? I'm not sure what I just agreed to. You agreed to let them prove themselves, which is generous and strategic in equal measure, he smiled. You're becoming quite good at this Duchess business. I'm winging it, mostly. Aren't we all? He pulled her close. But you're winging it better than most people who've spent their whole lives preparing. Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Holloway appeared, her expression troubled. Your Grace, there's someone else here to see you. She insists it's urgent. Who? Your aunt, Your Grace, Mrs. Georgiana Whitmore. Eliza's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen Georgiana since the wedding, hadn't spoken to her, hadn't sent word or money or acknowledgement. Part of her had hoped never to see the woman again. "Do you want me to send her away?" Alexander asked quietly. Eliza was tempted. So tempted. But then she thought of Caroline, watching from the piano room, learning by example how to handle difficult people with grace. "No," she said. "I'll see her, but I'll see her alone." Georgiana waited in the small receiving room. A deliberate choice by Mrs. Holloway, Eliza noted. Not the grand drawing room reserved for honored guests, but the smaller, less impressive space for people of uncertain status. Her aunt looked older, thinner. The lines around her mouth had deepened, and her dress, while respectable, was clearly older and less fashionable than what she used to wear. "Eliza," she said, standing quickly. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Aunt Georgiana?" The bluntness made the older woman flinch. I came to apologize." "For which part? The years of contempt? The constant reminders of how much I'd failed? Or the testimony you gave to the Harringtons about my marriage being a sham?" Georgiana's face crumpled. "All of it. Every terrible thing I said and did. I was cruel to you, Eliza, and I'm sorry." "Why now? Why not 6 months ago? Why not 3 years ago when you first took me in and made me feel like a burden every single day?" "Because I was afraid." The words burst out of Georgiana like a confession. "After your father's ruin, I was terrified. Terrified of poverty, of losing status, of becoming what you'd become, invisible and worthless. So I pushed you down to keep myself up. I made you small so I could feel big." She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "And then I watched you rise. Watched you become everything I'd convinced myself you couldn't be. Watched you marry a duke, expose a conspiracy, become someone who matters." Her voice broke. "And I realized I'd wasted years being cruel to the wrong person, the person who actually needed help." Eliza stood very still, processing. Part of her wanted to rage, to list every wound, every casual cruelty, every moment of calculated humiliation. But another part, the part that had learned mercy from watching Alexander with Caroline, recognized something else. Her aunt was broken, had always been broken, and cruelty had been her only defense. "I can't forgive you," Eliza said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. You hurt me too much for too long." Georgiana nodded, accepting. "But," Eliza continued, "I won't destroy you either. I won't spread rumors or cut you off or punish you for what you did. You'd be within your rights. Rights don't interest me. Justice does." Eliza sat down across from her aunt. "You testified against me to the Harringtons. You tried to help them take Caroline away from us." "They paid me," Georgiana whispered. £1,000. I needed it so desperately, and they promised it wouldn't hurt you, that it would just create doubt. It almost worked. It almost cost us everything." "I know." Her aunt's voice was barely audible. "I know, and I hate myself for it." Eliza studied the woman who'd made her life miserable for 3 years, the woman who'd been both family and enemy. And she made a choice. "The Harringtons' assets are being liquidated to pay restitution to their victims," she said. "Some of that money will go to people they've harmed over the years. I'll make sure you receive a portion, enough to stabilize your situation." Georgiana's head snapped up. "What? Why would you?" "Because you're still my aunt. Because you took me in when you didn't have to. And because—" Eliza paused. "Because I refuse to become the kind of person who uses power to punish people for being desperate." "Eliza—" "But," she interrupted firmly, "we're not family anymore. Not in the way that matters. You made sure of that. This is charity, not reconciliation. Do you understand?" Georgiana nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I understand, and thank you. You're a better person than I ever was." "No," Eliza said. "I'm just someone who learned from your mistakes instead of repeating them." She stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Georgiana left quietly, and Eliza stood alone in the receiving room, feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd faced her past, set boundaries, chosen mercy without sacrificing justice, and she'd done it as the woman she'd become, not the girl her aunt had tried to diminish. That evening, the trial of Lord and Lady Harrington concluded. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, perjury, witness tampering. The sentence was equally swift. Life imprisonment for Lord Harrington, 20 years for Lady Harrington, complete forfeiture of assets and titles. The courtroom erupted in chaos, but Eliza and Alexander sat quietly in the gallery, Caroline between them, watching justice finally arrive. "It's over," Alexander said quietly. "Is it?" Eliza asked. "Will it ever really be over?" "The legal battle is. The rest," he squeezed her hand, "the rest we handle together." Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed again, but this time Alexander didn't avoid them. "Your Grace!" they shouted. "How do you feel about the verdict?" "Relieved," he said simply. "Justice has been served. My brother can rest, and my daughter can grow up knowing the people who killed her parents faced consequences." "And you, Your Grace," a journalist turned to Eliza. "The woman who helped solve the conspiracy. What's next for the Duchess of Blackthorn?" Eliza looked at the crowd of reporters, society observers, curious onlookers. 6 months ago, she would have shrunk from this attention, would have hidden behind Alexander and let him speak, but she wasn't that woman anymore. "What's next," she said clearly, "is building a future worth fighting for, not just for my family, but for every child who deserves safety, every woman who deserves respect, every person who's been told they're invisible." "That's quite an ambitious goal, Your Grace." "Good," Eliza replied. "I've learned that the only goals worth pursuing are the ones people say are impossible." The journalists ate it up, scribbling furiously. And in that moment, Eliza understood something profound. She'd stopped trying to fit into society's definition of a duchess. Instead, she was creating her own. The following weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of change. The Harrington estates were liquidated, their assets distributed among victims and creditors. Alexander threw himself into reforming estate management, implementing fair practices, creating systems that protected the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. And Eliza discovered something unexpected. She had power, not just as the Duchess, as herself. Women began coming to her, quietly at first, then in growing numbers. Women trapped in bad marriages. Women whose families had fallen on hard times. Women who'd been dismissed, diminished, told they didn't matter. They came seeking advice, support, resources. And Eliza, who'd spent 5 years invisible, suddenly found herself at the center of a quiet revolution. She started small, connecting women who needed employment with positions in the Blackthorn household, using her influence to open doors that had been closed, advocating for changes in how estates treated their staff. "You're building something," Alexander observed one evening, finding her in the study surrounded by correspondence. "I'm trying to." "What?" "A network, a support system, something that would have helped me when I was drowning and no one noticed." She looked up at him. "Is that foolish?" "It's brilliant." He sat beside her. "And dangerous. You're threatening the established order." "Good. The established order needs threatening." His smile was proud and fierce. "My revolutionary Duchess." "Your partner," she corrected, "in everything." But not everyone was pleased with the changes. The backlash came at a society event 3 months after the trial, a grand ball hosted by the Duke and Duchess of Somerset. Eliza and Alexander attended reluctantly, knowing their presence was expected but dreading the performance. The ballroom was exactly as Eliza remembered from her invisible years, glittering, expensive, filled with people performing status and power like theater. But this time, when she entered, the room went silent. Not with contempt, with attention. "The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn," the announcer called. Every eye turned to them. Eliza wore a gown of deep sapphire blue, the color of the ring Alexander had given her, the color of her own choosing rather than someone else's prescription. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly. She wore no excessive jewelry, no desperate displays of wealth. She didn't need them. Her presence was enough. They made their way through the crowd, and people parted. Some nodded respectfully. Some whispered. A few looked hostile. And then Eliza saw her. Lady Beatrice Harrington. She shouldn't have been here. She should have been in prison. But she stood near the refreshment table, freed on a legal technicality pending appeal, her face gaunt and bitter, her eyes burning with hatred. Their gazes locked. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Lady Beatrice moved forward and several people gasped. Alexander's hand tightened on Eliza's arm, ready to intervene, but Eliza stepped forward to meet her. They stood face to face in the center of the ballroom, the wronged Duchess and the woman who'd tried to destroy her. "You took everything from me," Lady Beatrice hissed, her voice low but venomous. "My husband, my freedom, my family name." "No," Eliza said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure the truth came to light." "You're nobody. A jumped-up merchant's daughter, playing at nobility." "I was nobody," Eliza interrupted. "I'm not anymore. And the difference between us is simple. I built something with the power I was given. You tried to steal what wasn't yours and destroyed lives in the process. My granddaughter should have been mine. Your granddaughter was never property. She was a child who deserved love and safety, things you couldn't provide." Eliza's voice was steady, carrying across the silent ballroom. "And now she has both. No thanks to you." Lady Beatrice's face contorted with rage. "You think you've won? You think society will accept you? You'll always be the nobody who married above her station? And you'll always be the woman who murdered her own son-in-law for money," Eliza said. "So between us, I'll take my position." The ballroom erupted, not in whispers, in applause. It started with Lady Helena, then the Dowager Countess, then others, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. They were applauding Eliza. Lady Beatrice stood frozen, shock and fury warring on her face. Then she turned and fled, pushing through the crowd and out of the ballroom. The Duke of Somerset approached, his expression a mix of amusement and respect. "Well handled, Your Grace," he said, "though you've just made an enemy for life." "I already had her as an enemy," Eliza replied. "At least now everyone knows where we stand." The ball continued, but something had shifted. People approached Eliza not with condescension or pity, but with genuine respect. They asked about her work helping displaced women, about Caroline's recovery, about her marriage to the formerly untouchable Duke. And Eliza answered honestly, not playing a role, not performing nobility, just being herself. When they finally left, exhausted but satisfied, Alexander pulled her close in the carriage. "You were magnificent tonight." "I was honest, that's all." Honesty from someone with power is magnificent. He kissed her temple. "You've changed this world more in 6 months than most people do in a lifetime. We've changed it, together." "No," he said seriously. "This was you. I gave you a platform. You gave it meaning." When they arrived home, they found Caroline still awake, sitting on the stairs in her nightgown, Miss Petra beside her. "We tried to get her to sleep," the governess said apologetically. "I wanted to wait for you," Caroline said, "to make sure you came back." Eliza's heart broke a little. The girl still feared abandonment, even now. "We'll always come back," she said, gathering Caroline close. "Always, that's a promise. Even when I'm grown up and don't need you anymore?" "Especially then," Alexander said, joining them. "Family doesn't end when you stop needing help. It grows stronger." Caroline looked between them. "Are we really a family now? A real one?" "The realest," Eliza said. "Not because of blood or law, but because we chose each other. And that makes us unbreakable." That night, after Caroline finally fell asleep, Eliza stood in the nursery doorway, watching the girl's peaceful breathing. 6 months ago, this child had been hollow with grief, unable to speak, unable to hope. Now she was healing, growing, becoming herself again. "You did that," Alexander said softly, joining her. "We did that. No, you did. I provided safety. You provided hope." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "And you showed me something I'd forgotten." "What?" "That strength isn't just about control and power. It's about choosing to care when caring is dangerous, about fighting for people even when the odds are impossible." He turned her to face him. "You made me a better man, Eliza. A better father. A better Duke. You made me visible," she replied. "Not just to the world, to myself." They stood together in the doorway, watching their daughter sleep, and Eliza thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a ballroom where she was invisible to a courtroom where she'd been tested to a home where she was essential. From a strategic marriage to real love. From nobody to somebody, Not because of a title, but because she'd refused to disappear. The following spring, exactly 1 year after their marriage, Eliza stood in the garden at Thornfield, the garden she and Caroline had planted together. It had grown. Flowers bloomed in wild profusion, their colors bright against the dark stone of the estate. Caroline had been right to spell her name in the flower beds. It looked beautiful, chaotic, alive. Caroline herself ran between the rows, laughing as she chased a butterfly, her dark hair flying behind her. Miss Petra watched from a bench, smiling. Mrs. Holloway had even emerged from the house to see the garden, her stern expression softened by something that might have been pride. Alexander found Eliza standing by the gate, surveying their creation. "A year ago," he said, "this space was empty, cold. Nothing grew here." "A year ago I was empty," Eliza replied. "Now, look at us. Blooming. Thriving." He took her hand. "I have something to tell you." "Should I be worried?" "That depends on how you feel about the Queen requesting a private audience with us next week." Eliza's eyes widened. "The Queen? Why?" "Because our case exposed corruption in the nobility. Because we've become symbols of reform. Because—" he smiled. "Because my invisible wife has become impossible to ignore." "I don't want to be a symbol." "Too late. You already are. But you get to decide what kind of symbol you'll be." Eliza considered that. A year ago, the thought of meeting the Queen would have terrified her, would have felt like an impossible dream. Now, it felt like an opportunity. "Then I'll be the symbol of every woman who's been told she doesn't matter," she said. "And I'll make sure she knows that we do." "Ambitious." "You married an ambitious woman. Too late to complain now." His laugh was warm and real. "I wouldn't change a single thing." Caroline ran over, breathless and glowing. "Aunt Eliza, come see. The roses you planted are blooming." Eliza let herself be pulled into the garden, Alexander following, and they stood together among the flowers. This family built from strategy and survival, now blooming into something neither of them could have planned. That evening, as the sun set over Thornfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Eliza wrote a letter, not to society, not to the Queen, not to anyone who expected performance or perfection, to herself. She wrote about the journey from invisible to essential, about learning that strength came in many forms, about discovering that the most powerful thing a person could do was choose to be seen on their own terms. And she ended with a promise: "I will never be invisible again. Not because someone gave me a title or married me or made me important, but because I've learned that I always mattered. I just needed to believe it first." She sealed the letter and put it in a drawer in her study, not to send, but to keep, a reminder of who she'd been and who she'd become. Then she went upstairs to join her family. Alexander was reading to Caroline, not a children's story, but actual philosophy, which the girl found fascinating for reasons no one quite understood. They sat together in the library, Caroline curled against his side, both of them absorbed in the world of ideas. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching them. This was what she'd fought for. Not a title, not wealth, not status. This: family, home, love earned through choice and courage. "Are you going to stand there all night?" Alexander asked without looking up. "Maybe. You both look very scholarly. I don't want to interrupt." "You're never an interruption," Caroline said. "Come read with us." So Eliza joined them, settling into the warmth of their small circle, and they read together until Caroline fell asleep between them. They carried her to bed together, tucked her in together, and stood together watching her sleep. "We did good," Alexander said quietly. "We did better than good. We built something impossible. Nothing's impossible. We proved that." And he was right. A year ago, Eliza Whitmore had been invisible, a failure, a woman with no prospects and no future. Now she was the Duchess of Blackthorn, a mother, a wife, a symbol of change and courage, not because someone gave her those things, but because she'd fought for them with everything she had. And won. The woman no one chose had become the woman no one could ignore. Not through luck, not through birth, but through the most powerful force in the world, the choice to matter. And that made all the difference. Years later, when people told the story of the Duchess who'd changed society, they would focus on the trial, the conspiracy, the dramatic courtroom confrontation. But Eliza knew the truth. The real revolution hadn't happened in a courtroom. It had happened in small moments, in gardens planted with hope, in children learning they were valued, in women discovering they had power, in a marriage that started as strategy and became the foundation of everything. That was the real story. And it was still being written, every single day, by a woman who'd learned that being invisible was a choice, and she chose differently, forever.